Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again for our February webinar at Retina. And today I have a very special guest, Giorgo Paizanis, and he has been at BCG DV over the last few years, but has more than 15 years of experience developing and leading successful go-to-market strategies and driving profitable growth. He has extensive experience in digital marketing, monetization, corp dev in the tech industry, finance, telecoms, but I would love for him to give a quick intro. But before that, just want to give you guys a quick intro about, for those who are new to Retina and these webinar series, this webinar series, I want to give a quick introduction to Retina and myself. So my name is Imad Hassan. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Retina. I've spent most of my career thinking about customer lifetime value and customer analytics. Prior to this, I was at Facebook, where I ran a marketing operations and analytics team. Before then, merchant analytics at PayPal, and prior to then have a separate career in automation and building autopilots for helicopters and satellites. At Retina, many of you guys are familiar, but we are focused on a very interesting problem of predicting customer lifetime value at the individual customer level early on in a customer's journey, so that you can have your business start to optimize multiple functions around this metric. And obviously today's topic is a lot to do with customer acquisition and around that. And it'll be fun to kind of jump into that. But before that, Giorgo, I'm gonna pass the mic to you and maybe have you give your background and introduction as well.
Thanks, Imad. So hi, everyone. As Imad said, I work for BCG Digital Ventures, and just a little background, BCG is, of course, Boston Consulting Group, one of the top management consultancies in the world. Digital Ventures is a part of BCG Digital that's focused on innovating and launching new businesses. And I work within the growth practice. So we actually work on a series of things, everything from launching new businesses to actually optimizing large, Fortune 100 companies. And so we see, across a wide spectrum of industries. I've personally worked in the past few years on automotive, finance, e-commerce, industrial goods, you name it, quite a big spectrum of things. And so, and prior to that, I spent about 15 years working in sales and marketing roles, and for 6 of those led monetization and user acquisition in a game company called Sulaki. And so I've always had this sort of lens on how to do profitable marketing. BCG has just let me apply that in a much wider array of use cases and industries. And so it's been really interesting to dig into that, and happy to share more on this topic today. Thanks for having me, Imad.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'll give some of the listeners some context on how the genesis of this webinar. So one of the questions, as we've worked with large brands like Nestle's and Dollar Shave Clubs of the world to growing brands on the e-commerce side, we tend to get this question often from the execs on how should we think about how much budget should be allocated to marketing and specifically acquisitions. And the other couple of big things that are very related to that, Giorgo, that we've been chatting about is on the walled garden acquisition platforms like the Facebooks of the world is about to change with marketing attribution being, you will have to be done completely differently. So those two things are very top of mind. And I thought your background here is super relevant, and some of the work you've done with the margin-based marketing is going to be really interesting from that point of view. And one other thing that I'll share is I got to see when I was at Facebook is the aspect of buying campaigns and focusing on ROAS, and ROAS not necessarily working out as a great metric, and basically was able to foresee that this customer lifetime value metric is going to be a lot more relevant as businesses move towards more subscription business models. So from that point of view, I think this will be a really interesting topic. And again, I want to set the expectation for everyone who's joined. We try to keep this webinar is going to be interesting and fun with your participation. If you guys have questions, please be sure to share and ask using the chat or the Q&A tab at any point, and we'll make sure that, you know, as we share different topics, we're going to pause at different points to have you guys participate and ask some of those very interesting questions. We also have a couple of polls that we'll be pulling up during the presentation at a couple of instances for sure. But yeah, with that, why don't we jump right into it? Why don't we start with the concept of margin-based marketing? And this is, to me, I got, you know, Giorgo, I saw your work early on when you first wrote this with your colleague, and I wanted to kind of give you the floor to kind of introduce this topic of margin-based marketing.
Thanks. Yeah. So margin-based marketing is a pretty simple concept. I would say even just you know, really intuitive, that you want to optimally invest your marketing dollars to maximize profit. Now, you know, tracking that, how you do it is complicated, and also, you know, I think there's the like classic, you know, saying that, you know, I know how. You know, I know my marketing works, but, you know, I know half of my marketing works and the other half doesn't. So in this case, what we're trying to do is really understand in a more scientific way how that works. And but I think, you know, one of the key aspects of this is shifting marketing from being, you know, basically a cost line item on your P&L to being an input towards revenue, and just thinking about it that way, and being really honest about the performance. Just I've found is a great way to approach it, and also helps to create alignment across the organization. You know, if you do it well. And so here, what you see is just one of the you know, just graphics that we had in that original case. And I think just to take it a little bit beyond, a lot of people might be familiar with the idea of CLV, or what on this slide we call LTV, the lifetime value, and, you know, and CAC, and the ratio of CAC to LTV. But there's other ways you can think about it as well, which is, you know, how many customers do I need to grow this business to break even, and how should I allocate how much should I allocate to marketing in order to hit that break even, or to achieve my target growth rate. And so, you know, when you're thinking about it in this way and tracking it, you can actually use these metrics to you know, to figure out all of those things. So if somebody asks you, and I've had to do this personally when, you know, working on investment cases, you know, this is our goal. What is it going to take to get there? How many customers do we need? How much budget are we going to need? And you can get really detailed with this in terms of, you know, even by channel, adding in saturation and things like this. But at its basic premise, it's about gross margin per customer, and you know, how to grow profitably.
Yeah, I thought this was a very insightful graphic you had shared, because as a growth marketer, you're often having to have conversations with your finance teams on asking for budgets, and they might not know. So this is a really good framework to use. I felt like of bringing up that conversation. Another person that or role that we see asking this question quite often are the CEOs, who are thinking about their profitability and growth rates. But what I really liked about it was that you could probably do this at any level, right? Like you can, while it's probably great to do it at the customer level, but you can even start out at the highest level and estimate your CLV or LTV and CACs, and then go from there. And what really stands out to me is that this is pretty straightforward to kind of do some back of the envelope calculation on getting gross margins per customer, and then taking your firm's total fixed cost and dividing it by the gross margin per customer to get a sense of, hey, what is the minimum number of customers I need to get for the business to get to a break-even point as I'm growing the brand. And I think that jumped out quite very easily. And then if you wanted to know, hey, if I want to go way beyond that and be on a certain growth trajectory, what's the amount of what's the number of customers and what's the required budget I should be asking for from my finance teams or as the budget's getting built out.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, the thing that this highlights is that, you know, it's not just about maximizing the margin per customer, because that might come at the expense of growth. So, you know, just adding this extra element, you know, you can think about, what do I want to maximize? Do I want to maximize growth, or do I want to maximize profitability right now, or do I want a balance of the two? And I've seen, you know, different cases on the works I've done with clients. You know, in some cases where they really even push the profitability to just break even point so that they could completely maximize growth and get it to a scale before shifting the other way.
Let's go to this. So, you know, one of the things that we talk about here is CAC and LTV, and obviously, like, those can be broken down quite a bit. And let's start with some of these. So how have you seen Giorgo companies deal with getting to the CAC for customer level or groups of customers today? And maybe chat a little bit about both of these type of models, and then we can dive into the LTV.
Sure. Well, you know, if you work on a primarily digital business, you know, e-commerce, or I came from gaming background, and, you know, it was, there are a lot of tools, and it's pretty straightforward, and all the data is usually accessible and complete, right? So in that case, you know, you typically have attribution modeling, where you would be acquiring, and for every, you know, you would track all the way through where the click came from, and be able to assign all kinds of variables to individual customers. In other cases, you may have a business that has both offline and online components, like a SaaS or a sales business, where some of the activity is happening in a CRM, or you could have, you know, omni-channel retail, where you have in-store and you have e-commerce. In these cases, it's you know, definitely would still use attribution modeling, but you may have to layer in other things where, you know, some of the measurements happening offline and not coming in a digital stream of data. And that's where things like marketing mix modeling can come into play. I think traditionally this is really, you know, used a lot when there's a big TV advertising component as well. And so this is just, you know, you know, econometric kind of approach to saying, you know, what drove what, right? But I think the ideal is this sort of attribution modeling, when you know all the way down to the click, what happened, and often it's, you know, depending on your situation, it's a mix of two.
Yeah, and I feel like this is going to be the one that I'm interested in quite a bit. And the next portion of this topic, we're going to be chatting about marketing attribution quite a bit. So I think that'll be very, very interesting. And then the other component of margin-based marketing is getting to customer level profitability, but not only profitability for individual customers historically, but being able to predict them out for their lifetime in the future. And there are plenty of models out there that do this customer level lifetime value modeling, and that's something we've covered in other webinars. But maybe this is a good point to pause and take some questions from the attendees. And attendees, feel free to share your questions either in the chat or in the Q&A. Let me ask, while we wait for some questions to roll in, what is the most, which roles in the company think about margin-based marketing from your perspective the most? Like, who is this the most important to that you've seen working with your clients?
In my case, we often, you know, this comes into play on, you know, new ventures where we're trying to figure out, you know, how long is it going to take to break even? And so then we're often, you know, working with the C-suite, who are thinking about investing in a new business or internal business unit. Other times we might be optimizing a large organization's, you know, like a Fortune 100 company's huge marketing apparatus with, you know, hundreds of millions of spend, and that's often with the CMO. And at the large company level, it's you know, one of the things that is kind of common is, there's sometimes a tension between, the CFO and the CMO, and then the CEO trying to figure out what's really going on. Because, if marketing is producing the dashboards and saying that everything is great and it's profitable and we're doing a great job,
yeah.
sometimes, the other sides of the business don't always have that same lens. And I've seen also the tension between product and marketing, or sales and marketing. So I think having a common source of truth and understanding and really measuring this, if you've got the engagement across those groups, that works really well. But in terms of implementing, it's often, kind of marketing led, but, there's a big kind of, technology, IT kind of component to getting the infrastructure in place. And then, of course, typically across the whole C-suite, there's interest. And in particular around CAC and LTV, I'm seeing like, having questions come in around, how would we adopt this in our organization? And that tends to be at like the highest levels, CEOs.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the implementation part is kind of the biggest thing that is popping up all the time. Let's go into, what does marketing attribution look like in the post IDFA and cookieless world? And I wanted to kind of share the perspectives that we are seeing and how we're thinking about this. But while we do this, why don't we start with how our attendees are thinking about attribution? I'm sure that everyone here has had the notification on their Facebook Ads Manager pop up saying IDFA is going away, and it's going to have an impact on how we're going to share measurement. But I wanted to see how worried people are and what's kind of top of mind. And for those of you who are interested, basically, or aren't aware, basically two things are happening over the course of the next several months. One is the Apple is taking away the multi-day attribution that they would provide back to apps like Facebook's and Google's of the world whenever somebody viewed an ad. So that is going to have an impact on what kind of attribution window you can account for when you're trying to look at the actual measurement of any ad campaign. And on top of it, there are changes going on in the browser world where you're getting, the cookies are essentially starting to become a lot more constraint on the amount of time that you can use them for, which means that view through attribution is going to become much harder. And then on top of it, you have a bigger privacy discussion going on with GDPR and CCPA, and what happens if, like, how do you go from a world where consumers didn't have any choice to even opt in or opt out to maybe have a choice to opt out, to really going to a place where they have a choice to opt into ads measurement, and that seems like it'll be a time where we'll have to figure out a solution that doesn't exist today. Let's see. Any thoughts on this, Giorgo? What you're seeing on this?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to require changes on the technology side, to adopt the new tools. I think a lot of this is happening with with kind of the providers that you use, like a Retina or at the Facebook level, or Google Ads, or even companies like LiveRamp. I think the solutions are being put in place now as this happens, but that's going to require technical changes on the client side, and on top of that, it could create some new challenges in terms of implementing a margin-based marketing program, depending on how many people choose to opt in on that. So it's definitely kind of a lot of angst to see how's this going to play out and how do we adapt.
Yeah, I want to so I see a question from Professor Anand Bodapati here, and wanted to pose this to you, Giorgo. I don't know if you can see the Can you see the Q&A on your screen? If you could repeat the question and maybe share it.
Could you read out the question? I don't see it.
I'll read out the question. So the question is, the view of many is that fixed costs are sunk costs and largely irrelevant to optimization of individual one-to-one marketing, which is largely a variable component of the cost. In other words, the argument is that one should maximize the returns from one-to-one marketing regardless of the fixed cost.
Yeah, I mean, I can't disagree with that, but I would say that, you know, the ongoing overhead or fixed costs of a business, you need to have a certain size of business or size of customer base and revenue to cover those costs. And so if you're thinking about starting a new business and then growing it and scaling it, there's a long period where the P&L is going to have, it's going to be cash hungry, right? We know that new businesses need cash, and old businesses can, you know, if they're doing well, are cash cows and spit out cash. But, you know, to convince investors, to convince your CEO, to convince everybody in the organization that you're not just wasting money because you're spending money on growth, and that it is, you know, it is ultimately going to be profitable, even if the company is not profitable today. Having these metrics and this view in place helps a lot. So, you know, just and having that lever to know that, yes, you know, today the P&L is negative, we're pumping cash in, it's driving, you know, revenue growth, but we know, you know, that on a customer level, those customers are profitable that we're acquiring, and once we reach a certain, you know, scale, we will be profitable. I've seen some, like, I think Carvana is an interesting example. Like, if you look at their investor relations and their, you know, what they publish, they actually publish some of this on a market by market basis, because every market actually takes a while to get up to that scale and profitability. So like every city they launch, they kind of publish it this way and show how those numbers converge. And I think it's a great example of like a public company using this
approach. Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's move on to like the results of the poll. I'm not sure if everyone can see this, but basically, how concerned are you about using third-party cookies? About the highest vote was somewhat concerned, with 54% of the votes answering somewhat concerned. And then, do you have a solution to handle attribution without third-party cookies? Most have said no, but are looking for one. Well, I'll share with you guys you know, how we're thinking about this right now at Retna, and a solution that, you know, we think could be really interesting and useful. And we'll also talk about, like, you know, what we are seeing out there from results, and maybe share a quick demo. So here's the path that we are seeing as a good privacy-centric way of conducting attribution, at least in the walled garden type ad platforms. So it starts off with the purchase event. So as soon as the customer converts on your website or your app, or even at the store, we have some level of PII that might be like email address, phone number, address, first name, any type of PII. You have that information. You have customer attributes. These are things you know about the customer. It might be onboarding, what type of product they bought, what was in their cart, what sessions they had before they got to it. Order attributes, which might be things like what was in, you know, what was in the order, amount of the order, was there a discount used, was the order a gift for someone, or was it for themselves? All of these attributes are generally collected. And then today what we're doing is we're, you know, or any other CDP platform that is really smart about this, will take the PII part and do a one-way hash. And what a one-way hash, for those not familiar, is basically uses a hashing algorithm to convert an email address or a phone number into scrambled code that cannot be turned back into an email address. It will always be the same if you convert. So if my email address imad@retna.ai got converted to the scrambled code, it will always be the same scrambled code, but you can't go from the scrambled code back to the email address. So first thing is computing that hash. And then what we're doing is computing customer lifetime value, but that doesn't have to be the case. You can pretty much pass along the actual purchase value to the offline conversion pixel. And I wrote down Facebook just to make the example a lot more clear. And I'll show you guys a quick demo of what this might look like. But this could be with any walled garden, like Pinterest, Google, you name it, and even like some of your apps like Pandora or Spotify, because they know who they're showing those ads to. So the best first thing you get out of that is some understanding of what percentage of the customers match to the platform. So if, let's say I have 100 customers converted, and you send that over to the offline conversion pixel, it will tell you what percentage of the customers were matched to the platform, which means that Facebook has some knowledge about these consumers. And then the next thing is to take it and then attribute it directly to a campaign and show it in your ads manager. So this is kind of the solution that we are seeing as the most prevalent solution coming out of, and it's not new, it has been there before. It's just that the cookies and the pixel and signal was such an important or such a robust solution that this one kind of took the back seat for the longest time. And the reason I find this to be a very privacy-centric platform is that you still have your customer that can send a GDPR or a CCPA request either to the advertiser or to the platform to cut off that measurement loop if they wanted to, which makes it a lot more easier for us to comply, not only comply, but give the consumer a choice if they want to be included in the ad platform measurement or not. Now, obviously, like long-term implications, I think there might be quite a few where you'll see platforms popping up that probably pay consumers to be a part of a measurement platform or measurement study. But for now, I think that this is what I'm seeing as a potential solution. I'll pause here. I want to, let's see if there are any questions that come up. But Giorgo, tell me what you think about this, and if you've seen any of the growth folks start to use something along these lines.
Yeah, well, I think this is consistent with the approach I've seen, promoted by like LiveRamp, for example, and kind of what I think also like the SCAD network approach that's sort of Apple is bringing up as a replacement for just the IDFA that's going away. I think this is definitely the way of the future. I like how you're thinking about this. The one thing I would add to this slide is just that as a marketer, I'm concerned about many channels. So Facebook is just one of many. And so what I really want to do is get a holistic picture. So there may be some additional tech that we have in this stack to be able to aggregate it, because I can't just port that straight into Facebook and then get the aggregate view. So I may have a customer data platform in here and my own data warehouse where I'm doing some of this and plugging something like Retina in to do the the number crunching and then feeding that out everywhere. And I think that the takeaway is that requires some extra work to set up and some extra tech in place to be able to do it. Whereas up until now, I mean, to a certain degree, you could do that with really minimal tech just within the individual platforms. And so I think this is going to be kind of a push towards really taking more ownership of your attribution, whereas before it's kind of like you just trust what you're seeing in the platforms. And so that's a big shift from a marketer perspective.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Any other questions on this? Please share. There's one question here that I'll answer. It's how do you compute customer lifetime value right after a purchase versus having to wait for a long time? This is a really good question. So one thing we found at Retina and focused on is estimating customer lifetime value early on in a customer's journey, so that because that's when you're spending the most amount of money with a customer. So what we'll typically do is we will compute customer lifetime value for all historical customers for whom we have a lot of transactions data, and we know a lot about the types of orders they made on their first purchase, what kind of onboarding they provided. And we also have an Experian API that we will ping to get a bunch of attributes about that customer to bolster the customer attributes that we know about them. And then when a new customer walks in the door, what we'll do is we'll look at all the customer attribute matches and find the closest lookalikes of those customers, just knowing the first transactions data, or sometimes not even the transactions data, and estimate what journey that customer is going to take. Typically, what we found, and this is pretty insightful. What are the factors early on in a customer's journey that predict if that customer is going to be a high lifetime value or not a high lifetime value? And here are like the top 5 signals. There are quite a few more that I'm not going to list, but here are the ones, and some of them will be very obvious, some of them will not be obvious. So is the first order a gift purchase? And typically you can take a look at the distinction between billing address and shipping address, and there is some signal there. You can look at things like, is the first order a subscription order or not? Obviously, subscription orders result in a much higher CLV. Then you have the number of items in the first order basket, right? If they're just there to purchase one specific item they were looking for, or they purchased multiple items. The size of the basket is also generally very important. And then one other one that tends to jump out is the type of promotions or discounts used. These jump out quite often as well as very important factors. And then there's a whole flurry of long tail signals that I'm not sharing right now, but these top 5 tend to be very high value. All right, with that, let's talk about implementation strategies. Giorgo, maybe I'll pass it to you. Can you talk about like how should one get started? Let's say they're all about margin-based marketing. They're thinking about profitability at the customer level. Where do they get started?
Yeah, well, and I don't think you used the word today, but we've talked about it in the past that, sometimes people tend to, it's pretty simple, right? To just calculate an overall LTV and an overall CAC. You can do those. You don't need complex models like what you described at the customer level. But I think the word you used was peanut buttering. So if you peanut butter just the number across all the users, you've lost all the ability to optimize and to make decisions on a more granular level, and that's really what this is all about. So our goal is to kind of unpeanut butter as much as possible of this equation. And so I think the first step is to really think about what decisions are you making that you could make different if you knew what the profitability was at that level. Some company, like I'd mentioned earlier, the example of Carvana, and like doing it on a market launch basis, looking at cohorts over time as they launch markets, that was a relevant lens to take. I've worked on other cases where geography is a big deal. Platform could be a big deal, but I'd say the ultimate is what you're doing, which is customer level bottom up, because then you can you can build those segments on the fly and really think about things, and you can do all kinds of automation that you couldn't do if it wasn't on that customer level. So I think the first thing is to understand what is that unit of analysis and what are the decisions I'm going to make differently if I have that information. Once you have that, you can think about how are you going to collect the data. Of course, there's the basic infrastructure of marketing attribution, but understanding your level unit of analysis and then thinking about the data you need to collect is the next step. And then you have to, just like if you're analyzing a survey or something, you'd have to think okay, at that unit of analysis, do I have statistically significant data? And I think what's interesting is doing customer level and doing aggregate level are completely different approaches, because customer level, it's lots of data on one person transaction, whereas on the aggregated, it's lots of data, but not transaction level on everybody. It's just sort of aggregate data about a lot of people. So they're really night and day approaches there. So that's a big distinction on what, because it's a different level of data and input and tech. And then from there, thinking about where are you going to get the data, the tech that's in place. And, if you're in a large organization, there's probably a lot of alignment across departments that you need to work on as well.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like the department alignment is one that, or getting the buy-in, right? Like just because you are excited about margin-based marketing doesn't mean the whole org is. So being able to then like convince everyone is probably a very arduous process, because you've got to go all the way to the C-suite many times to get the budgets going.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, actually, these are such like CLV or LTV and CAC and that ratio. It's really well known in like e-commerce, right? So if you bring that up, people are going to know what you're talking about, and it's going to be fine. But it's not like that in all industries and companies. And it's a pretty, actually, when you think about it, it seems really intuitive, margin-based marketing. I want the profit per customer, on a long term, but it's actually pretty abstract, because it's not linked to like one purchase. It's the projected future value of all the value that's going to bring, which you could even take into account, the margin, the gross margin of the products, or the, the net profit margin, factoring in shipping and promotions and all. There's all kinds of stuff that can get baked in that make it really kind of abstract. And so there's sometimes an education component around aligning. Otherwise, you just throw the numbers up and people are like, what is this?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to share a quick demo of like what you just mentioned. Here's how we're helping companies. We do this obviously for like large brands in a very different way. But let's say you were a Shopify store and you were acquiring most of your customers through Facebook. This is kind of what we're doing, and I'll share my screen. We have a Shopify Plus or Shopify app where any company could come in, put in their Shopify URL, install the app, and this may take a minute while I load. While this loads, I'm gonna show you what this will do. So you come in, you put in your Facebook business ID number, and then it'll send you an invitation directly to that. And give you guys a sense of what this looks and feels like. Right, that's it. So once you do this, within a few hours, you basically start to see a couple of new columns in your, so here I'm showing a live business ads manager from a Facebook account for a company called Goriana. And I've just done it at the ad set level so that I don't have to I don't end up exposing how much they're spending and all that. But wanted to share with you guys what additional things start to show up in Business Manager as soon as you do those very, basically the 2-click integration. You start to see this new column at the campaign level in your ads manager, where you're not only seeing the customer lifetime value and all of the other metrics, but you're monitoring the LTV to CAC ratio directly in your ads manager. And what this allows you to do is something very cool, which is you can go down, so you're looking at the ad set level, you can go up to the campaign level, but you can say, hey, look, here are campaigns that are performing really poorly when it comes to LTV to CAC ratio, LTV to CAC ratio of 1 versus like this one campaign that's bringing in, 4.24 CAC to LTV ratio. So what I can do is I can go in deeper and look at not only which ad sets were performing well, but what exact creative is performing well and what the LTV to CAC ratio is. So here are 2 creatives for whatever reason tend to be a lot higher LTV to CAC ratio, but obviously not converting that many here. Actually, no, there are plenty of conversions on these. Yeah, so they should probably be spending a lot more money on this creative and optimizing a lot more ad dollars here. But we don't typically stop here. What we've done is we've also, since there's a budget recommendation and an optimization component, we've kind of put that into a admin panel where they can not only look at which ad creatives are working really well from LTV to CAC ratio point of view, but also some suggested budget. So let's say they're like, hey, look, we want to make sure we're acquiring a minimum of 300 conversions per day, but keeping an LTV to CAC ratio above 5. You can kind of go in here and start to then see which campaigns you should be spending more money on in order to keep your LTV to CAC ratio numbers high while keeping your minimum conversion numbers at a high number as well. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it. I've just given you guys a very small example using, you know, e-commerce company on Shopify using Facebook mostly, but obviously there are expansions of this outside of Shopify, outside of Facebook as well. But I'll pause here. It's a good pausing point for some Q&A. Giorgo, I'm seeing another question, and I want to let me read it out loud and then decide, you know, if you think you want to take it or if you want me to take it. So the question from Lila Yang is how to keep tuning the CLV model and improve its performance. Once the CLV model is launched, it's not easy to get the true CLV for new acquired customers. So is this a proxy metric, or should we be constantly tuning it? I think I can answer that. So good question. So you should be tuning your model. So there are two models. The one is the model based on the transactional history. That part, obviously, you know, as soon as you get a new customer, a new transaction, you can retune and keep that up to date. But then there's another model that is the lookalike model, which is estimating the CLV of your most recent customers. And that model doesn't have to be retrained at the same frequency, because all you're doing is you're estimating what the customer attributes are and what the resulting expected customer lifetime value is. So there's a model that's doing the full training. We typically want that to be with the full data set. We typically want that to be at a frequency much faster than your budgets that you're changing, but it doesn't have to be, you know, it doesn't have to be like every hour. Like you don't typically have to do that. But Giorgo, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that, on what you're seeing.
Yeah, I've definitely thought about that. I think you have a you know, probably more insight on this one because of the you know, nitty-gritty details of modeling it. But my experience is also, like, if you're thinking about LTV, often the first purchase or the first data point in a cohort's spend life cycle, it makes a huge difference, at least from what I've seen. And so, you know, it's really hard to overcome through just future spend if, you know, a new customer or cohort's first purchase is really low. You know, so often is the case that, like, that first, I think you had mentioned, like, average order value of the first basket. I think really good insight on, like, the, you know, the gift purchase, like maybe not leading to higher lifetime. So I've used that as a kind of proxy, is like, what was the, you know, first month spend or first day spend or something like that. And in other industries, like, we use retention and things like that as proxies. But I think when you have a really good model, like what Imad described, you don't need to, and that's way better. And so I'm really excited to see that also making its way right into the Facebook dashboard. That's cool.
All right, I think with that, let's start to conclude. I know we're close to the end of time, but maybe Giorgo, you can help us wrap up. We'll share some of these concluding concepts, but also open it up to questions if anyone has any. And Carolyn, if you can help us put up our last poll, we just want to see how interested people are in this topic as well. But Giorgo, I'll pass it to you for sharing some of the key concepts behind margin-based marketing.
Yeah, so I think you know, one key concept is to remember that the one thing this can do is help align everybody in the organization and also the investors outside the organization. And so, you know, if this is a really familiar topic to you, maybe you know, one thing to take away is that you know, it might not be so familiar to others, but could be really valuable if you you know, calculate it and explain it in a clear way and start to use that as a dashboard that goes beyond just your own optimization. You know, the other thing is the goal of doing that and sharing it out across the organization is to shift marketing spend from being a line item on the P&L, a cost line item, to being an input towards revenue. And I think that's a really important shift, because I've been in companies, I've seen companies where, you know, as soon as you start to hit bumpy road or down economy, the knee jerk is to just cut the marketing spend, and it's a downward spiral. And so having this other view of it, I think can really get you into a better place there. And then putting it in place is not trivial, and requires some planning and strategy and technology. and thoughtfulness to get it there. But it can be really powerful. I mean, this is like the holy grail, I think, of marketing, where before you'd have to kind of guess at what's working, and now in somewhat real time and automation, you can be really precise. And then unfortunately, it's going to get a lot harder, with the end of cookies, third-party cookies, and IDFA. But I think it'll bring some benefits in terms of privacy for users, in terms of also probably, the shift towards doing it yourself is going to also push us more towards like people-based attribution versus just walled gardens and platforms. So I'm kind of excited about where it nets out. It's going to be a little bumpy for the next year. But yeah, I think those are kind of my key takeaways from the call.
Awesome. Well, this is a good point to pause for questions and go into Q&A. There are two ways to do this. One is you can ask your question directly on the Q&A panel, or if you'd like to unmute and ask, please use the raise your hand button, and we'll have you unmute your mic to ask the question. But I'll start with the ones that I'm seeing here. Tyler Prunn's asking, to simplify the complexity of attribution and overall budget, my company implemented a percentage of net revenue spend model. As a business, we know we can afford to spend a certain percentage of net revenue. If revenue beats forecast, then spend is allowed to increase, and vice versa. What do you think about this approach? And then I'll go to the next part of the question, Giorgo.
And this is a great question, because it kind of cuts at the heart of one of the points that I made, which is that marketing is, the spend should be an input towards revenue. And by using this kind of metric, it actually kind of ties to the other way, where marketing is a line item or a cost, and you're just looking at it as what's that percentage of our revenue as a cost. The challenge you'll face is if you're trying to grow. Because in the short term, if you want to grow from, especially if you want to grow really rapidly, that ratio is going to look bad for a while. And that's, so I think it can be a real constraint on growth. Even worse, when you have some kind of deterioration of certain parts of the business, you can wind up sort of, just cutting to try to achieve that ratio. That has, rather than kind of looking at like, oh, which pockets of users should I be investing in, and which ones are not profitable or going away. Yeah.
And then the second part of the question is, we have Facebook attribution set up, which takes into account other marketing channels and weights the attribution using position-based model. So how might we find balance between using Facebook attribution and the new way that Retna is just proposing? This is a good question. Let me think about what. Yeah. So I think the bigger question is incrementality and being able to attribute incrementality. And I think what this is going to result in, the new way of doing this is going to result in even more adoption of using incrementality-based test attribution. But because the biggest signal we're going to lose is the actual number of conversions and not being reliable on those. So now you're looking at like estimated number of conversions and the value or customer lifetime value or LTV to CAC ratio of those conversions. Now you can start, and I think the bigger shift that's going to happen is incrementality of those metrics and attributing those more so than this, which reminds me that our next webinar is going to be either the next one or the one after that is currently getting planned with a company called Measured, which does exactly the incrementality portion of what we do. And I think it'll get addressed there as well. Right, I don't see any other questions, but I wanted to make sure that if anybody's interested in this topic, please reach out. We are also, if you're a company that's using Shopify and Facebook tends to be a very important channel for you, we are also doing a few pilots, testing out the Facebook attribution as well as the LTV to CAC signals there, and wanted to see if anybody's interested, please reach out, or if you know of a company that can leverage that. we're always happy to test this out with a couple of new interesting brands, and would be very happy to like accommodate that. But with that, I'm not seeing any other questions. Giorgo, I wanted to give you a big shout out for one, working with us on the margin-based marketing 2.0 article, which if anybody hasn't seen that, it's there are a couple of articles out there from Giorgo and his team. There's the original margin-based marketing, and then margin-based marketing 2.0 that Liz and Carolyn from our team co-authored with Giorgo. So I would highly recommend that. Thank you so much for participating in this webinar today. And I also wanted to thank everybody else who joined today for the session.
And thank you for putting it together. This is my favorite topic, and excited to see how your new offering develops as well with the Facebook tool. That looks really cool.
Awesome. All right, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.